Hi, my name is Ash, and today we are going to learn the basics of single sign-on and how to troubleshoot single sign-on issues. I am making this video assuming you at least know the terminologies like what is SP or service provider, what is IDP or identity provider, and you at least have the working knowledge. If you don't, let me know in the comment section and I'll make a video for you. Okay, so if you search the internet, you will find a plethora of information on single sign-on, but they're all theoretical. So I thought I should make a video, a working example. So I'm going to explain things as I've come to understand them, and if you find any information to be incorrect, please let me know in the comment section. All right, let's dive in and start by understanding the metadata file. Now, this is a sample metadata file that I've gotten off the internet, and by looking at it, we can see that it's for ADFS. A metadata file can be a big one like this. It's a big file though, right? And it can be a smaller file like this. It doesn't matter. What matter are three important things or fields or values, if you will, and they are entity ID, the signing certificate, and the endpoints. In SP or service provider metadata file, the endpoint is called ACS or Assertion Consumer Service Location, and in the IDP file, the same field is called Single Sign-On Service Location. So as long as you have these three fields in the metadata file, it's a valid file. The rest of the fields or tags are optional. Now, in this file, let me show where the entity ID is. Entity ID is usually at the top. So if you see the cursor, I am showing you the entity ID on my screen. Let's search for the signing certificate. Let me do a Control F. All right, so here is my signing certificate. And let's first search for the endpoint, which can be single sign-on service location, which is this. So as long as you have these three information in the metadata file, you're good to go. In the next file, in the second file, the entity ID is here. This is my certificate, and this is my endpoint for IDP. Now, looking at the metadata file, how can I know if this is an SP metadata file or an IDP metadata file? For that, we need to check the SSO descriptor tag. So let me search. Here it says IDP SSO descriptor, which means this is an IDP file. Now, if I search the same thing in my previous file, where's the, okay. So I see SP SSO descriptor, which means this is an SP file, but it also has an IDP SSO descriptor, which means this is also an IDP file. So this file can act as both SP and IDP depending on what you need from this system. In SP, the endpoint is called Assertion Consumer Service Location, and in IDP, the same endpoint is called as Single Sign-On Service Location, right? So now between SP closing and opening and closing tags, these information is for SP, and between the IDP SSO descriptor opening and closing tags, these information is for IDP. Now, you will see a lot of information on this file which is not even available on the second file. It doesn't matter because, like I said before, as long as you have those three information, the entity ID, the certificate, and the endpoints, you're good to go. Now you will see that I have a lot of information in this file, for example these attributes, whereas these are not even available in the second file. Indicating support for a given attribute does not imply that a given requester can or will receive it. And just because I do not have those attributes in this file doesn't mean that it's not supported. It simply means that it is not claimed. Now, let's see how to generate a new metadata file. You might uh, come across a situation where you have to generate a metadata file using a third-party tool. So we should know how to do that. And I will go to my favorite website that I like to go to, which is samltool.com. Let me remove this information for now. By the way, this is an awesome website. You can do a lot of things here. So we go to samltool.com and go to online tools at the top. Go to build metadata on the left side. Click on IDP. Now, like I said before, as long as you have entity ID, you have single sign-on URL and the certificate, you're good to go. So let me, just for example, let me just put UID and let me put post. What happened? Okay, sorry. And what is certificate? Scroll down and click on build IDP metadata. Oops, okay, so it needs to be URL. All right, let's try again. And there you go. You can copy paste this content, put it in a notepad, save it as .xml. So you can generate SP metadata file using the same trick. Come to SP, give the entity ID and give the ACS URL and certificate, and you will see that rest everything is optional. So again, as long as you have those three, you're good to go. Now let's see some SAML request and response examples. First, let me tell you what is a SAML request. Well, in simple terms, it's a request made by an SP to the IDP, and it contains the endpoints that are shared in the metadata file. So let's look at some of the examples to understand better. I am using a sample SP and a sample IDP that I've gotten off the internet. And here is my SP URL. So what I did, I went to this website, right? I downloaded the metadata file and I put the metadata file here, and I'm just, it gave me a URL that I have it here, and I'm going to access and I'm going to show you how the SAML request and response looks in the real time. So let me access this URL. Now, what will happen if I access this? This is my SP application URL. If I access this, it should go to IDP for authentication, and upon successful authentication, it should come back on SP. This is my sample SP, this is my sample IDP, right? Now, carefully observe the redirection. At the moment, this is SP, right? Now, I hit enter, and it goes to SAML test, which is IDP. Now the URL changed and SP has made a SAML request. The request has gone to IDP for authentication. Always remember, when the URL changes is when a SAML request or response is generated, right? So now let me complete this flow. right? This is the username, and here's the password, and people log in. Now, from IDP, it went back to SP. Now a SAML response will be generated. For whatever reason, if the request fails on the SP page itself, a SAML request will not be generated because the redirection won't happen, the URL won't change, and same goes with IDP. For whatever reasons, if you get an error on the IDP page itself and it doesn't redirect back to SP, there won't be a SAML request. I'm sorry, there won't be a SAML response. Now, we know that a SAML request and response has been generated, but how to look at it? For that, I personally use SAML message decoder, which you can see here. It's a Chrome extension. You can go to Chrome extension, you can download the SAML message decoder, and you can start looking at SAML request and response. So now, if I click on this, this is my SAML request, and I'll explain what these fields are. And this is my SAML response, right? Now, since this is a sample application, a lot of information is not included here. For example, the mapping attribute, the algorithm, signing algorithm, all these information is missing. But let's see what we have. SAML request is a request made by SP to IDP. So this is how I've come to understand it. The entity ID of SP will go to the endpoint of IDP, the single sign-on URL, and in the response, the entity ID of IDP will go to the ACS URL of SP, which is the endpoint of SP. So I'll come to that later. Let's look at what information we have in SAML request. The first thing that you should see is the issuer. Issuer is same as the entity ID of SP, and we have it here. Oops. So this is the SP ID that I had downloaded from my sample app. Here's the entity ID. So issuer is the entity ID of SP, and it goes to IDP. So this is my sample IDP file, right? It goes to this location, and it should be the destination in SAML request, which you will find here. Now, you will also see assertion consumer service URL, which is the ACS URL, which is the endpoint of SP. In some applications, you will find it. In some of the applications, you won't find it. It actually depends upon the application as to how it is designed. Some of the applications do not have it, and I will come to that as if you do not have it, or if you have it, what importance it has. Now let's look at the SAML response. Here the issuer is this, which should be the entity ID of IDP, which I have here, and the destination should be here, all right, which is the ACS URL or the endpoint of SP, which is here. It also says ACS. Now, let me show you a little diagram which I prepared to make it better. So this is my SP and this is my IDP. SP contains the ID, the certificate, and the endpoint. IDP contains the ID, the certificate, and the endpoint. In SP, the endpoint is called ACS, and in IDP, endpoint is called SSO. So when SP makes a request to IDP, this is what happens, and this is how I have come to understand, and this is what we actually saw in SAML request. Let me show it again. So in the SAML request, the entity ID of SP is going to the destination, which is the SSO URL of IDP. And when a response is generated, the entity ID of IDP goes to the ACS URL of SP. Now, this is the simplest explanation that I came up with. Now, of course, there's a lot of information in SAML response, and we'll go to all those things one by one. But let me cover this ACS URL here in SAML request. If the ACS URL, if the ACS location is not mentioned in the service, in the SAML request, in that case, the IDP must import the SP file. Otherwise, the request will not know, or the response will not know where to go back to. If you are sending the ACS URL in the request, then you don't necessarily, is the keyword here, you don't necessarily need to import the SP file, because the ACS URL is present in the SAML request itself, which will tell the IDP basically where to go back to after successful authentication. So, by the way, in ideal cases, the SP file should be imported in an IDP system and IDP file should be imported in SP system. But some of the IDPs or SPs out there, they don't have the functionality. They just give you the endpoints and they expect you to play with it. So if my request contains ACS URL, I don't necessarily need to have the SP file imported, because my IDP will know from the request itself as to where to go. If you do not see the ACS URL in the request, don't be alarmed. There's nothing wrong. It's just that your application is not giving that information in SAML request, and you need to have a file imported. Now, coming to SAML response, you will see a lot of information, right? So let me copy all these and put it in Notepad so that I can explain better. This is my Notepad++. I'm copying SAML response. I don't need this. All right, I am using a plugin which is pretty print. It shows in a pretty format. So the upper part is my SAML request and this is my SAML response. Now, there's a lot of information that you get from these requests and responses. The first thing that you should note is, of course, the issuer and the destination. It doesn't show the mapping attribute. It should show, but it's a sample app, so it's missing. And algorithm, signing algorithm. And it also shows an ID of the SP, which should match with in response to ID in SAML response. It has an ID of its own, but we don't look at this. We look at in response to, because this ID is a response of the ID which was made in SAML request, which is present in SAML request. So if these two IDs are matching, it means this SAML response is for the corresponding SAML request, and vice versa. If in SAML response you do not have in response to, it means it is an IDP initiated SSO. In IDP initiated SSO, there is one step less. There is no SP coming to IDP and going back to SP. It's IDP and you log into IDP, you authenticate yourself first, and then you have a list of all the applications which are available inside your IDP, and you access one of those applications, or you use a relay state URL to directly go to that SP after you are authenticated to your IDP. So if you do not have in response to tag, but you have a SAML response, it means it's an IDP initiated SSO. But if you have an in response to, there will be a SAML request associated with it. All right. Now, in SAML response, you have issuer, you have destination, right? You can see the signature method, you can see the digest. These are the information that you should look for in a SAML response. These will help you with the troubleshooting, because uh, in most of the cases people just miss the small things. For example, they miss importing the file, which is absolute nonsense, right? People say that I've been trying to access but it's not working, and turns out they didn't even import the right file. And what if I import a wrong file? How would I know? I would know that if I look at the SAML request and response, I will see the destination, I'll see the issuer, and I'll open the metadata file and I'll see if the information is correct. So all this information can help you with the troubleshooting as well. If you have the metadata that you get from your system and the metadata that you get from third party or vendor or SP or IDP, right? If you have both the files, you can match, you can see the issuer, the destination, and you can come to your SAML request and response and match them, right? Now, look at the certificate. This is my signing certificate. In many cases, the certificate has expired. It's not the correct certificate. It's not the right certificate. So you can match the certificate, and let me show you how to export the certificate from here and how to see the certificate information. So I am going to copy this, going to my desktop, new, let me open this, paste this, save it, come out of it. Okay, I don't have extensions, so I will have to change the extension of this file to .cer. So this is the certificate information. You can see the valid from and valid to. If the certificate has expired, you will come to know by looking at this screen and by exporting the certificate like how I just showed you, right? Details and certification path. If the certificate is not CA verified certificate, like I said before, if your identity system is not stickler about details, self-verified certificates should also be valid, but some of them do not accept self-verified. They want a CA verified certificate, right? So let me go back to my SAML response. The next information that we look for is the subject. The subject tags contains user information. If you have a SAML response, a valid SAML response, but you do not have a subject tag, it means there is some problem from the IDP, not from SP. It can be a problem for SP, but mainly is the problem from IDP because the user was not properly authenticated, or there was some problem with the user, probably some information mismatch. So if you do not have a subject tag in SAML response, it means there is some problem on the IDP side. So in the subject tag, you can see which user was trying to authenticate and what are the user attributes. So Here is the attribute tag, and the attribute name is subject ID, and the value, where's the value? All right, the value is this. The subject uh, attribute name is role, and the value for that attribute is manager. The attribute name is telephone number, and the value for that attribute is this. So these are the attributes which are set on the IDP system, and these are customizable. You can customize according to your needs. And let me go back to IDP and show you that these information was. So let me, this is my IDP, right? So let me click on download metadata file. If I come back, I'm sorry, if I come down, you will see that this IDP already has these attributes predefined. So it says attributes sent are these, right? So these are the attributes which were already configured by default, and these are the attributes that we see in the SAML response. All right. Uh, so for now, let's take a break. And in the next video, I will show you how to run a Fiddler trace for SSO requests, and how to look for information in Fiddler trace. Until next time, thank you.